I'm Gary, 34 years old, and until last month, my biggest concern was whether to upgrade my gaming PC or finally take that vacation to Alaska. I've spent the last decade building my life as a software developer in Seattle, gradually working my way up to a comfortable two-bedroom condo with a view of Lake Union that I'm still amazed I can afford. Then came the phone call that turned everything upside down. My sister Madison had sold her family home for what she called a freedom tour in a converted luxury van. Now, 6 months and one predictable disaster later, my parents were calling with the expectation that I would open my home indefinitely to Madison, her husband, and their 2 kids. The audacity of it knocked the wind right out of me. Before I get into this wild story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and hit subscribe if you want to see how I handled this family crisis. Growing up in suburban Portland, Madison and I had the typical sibling dynamic amplified by a family system that never quite balanced out. I was 3 years older, always cast as the responsible one, while Madison was the baby of the family who could seemingly do no wrong. Our parents weren't bad people by any stretch, just imperfect ones who fell into patterns they probably never recognized. I can pinpoint the exact moment I understood this dynamic would define our lives. I was 12, Madison 9. We'd both received $20 from our grandmother for our summer birthdays. Within 2 days, Madison had spent all her money on candy and a cheap toy that broke almost immediately. When she saw I still had mine, carefully saved for a video game I'd wanted for months, she begged for $5. When I refused, she went crying to our parents, who lectured me about sharing with family. They took $5 from my savings and gave it to her. The pattern was set. By high school, I'd accepted my role. I worked part-time at the local grocery store, maintained solid B+ grades, and stayed out of trouble. Madison bounced from passion to passion, quit the volleyball team mid-season when it got too hard, and relied on our parents' constant intervention to maintain passing grades. Yet somehow, her spirit was celebrated as free and creative, while my stability was taken for granted. College solidified our different paths. I studied computer science at Oregon State, working 20 hours weekly at the campus IT help desk to minimize student loans. I ate ramen more nights than I care to remember and graduated with manageable debt and immediate job prospects. Madison attended 3 different schools in 4 years, changing majors repeatedly before settling on communications, with our parents covering the financial fallout of each transfer and program change. My first job paid $42,000 a year at a small tech company in Portland. I shared an apartment with 2 other guys, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and put 15% of every paycheck into savings. 3 years later, I moved to Seattle for a better opportunity. By 30, I had a 6-figure salary and enough saved for a down payment on my condo. Nothing came easy or quickly, but I built something solid through consistent work and careful planning. Madison's life took a different trajectory. She met Doug during her final college year. He was steady, practical, working toward a business degree with plans for a marketing career. I actually liked him and thought his groundedness might balance my sister's impulsivity. They married at 22, sooner than seemed wise, but I kept my concerns to myself. Their children arrived in quick succession. Emma was born less than a year after the wedding, Lucas 2 years later. They were beautiful kids who deserved every advantage, which initially seemed to motivate Madison toward greater stability. With our parents' help with the down payment, and I later learned, an additional loan from me that Madison had convinced them to make on her behalf from a family trust, they bought a 4-bedroom home in a good school district outside Portland. Doug secured a solid position as a marketing manager at a local company, while Madison worked part-time as a yoga instructor when the kids started school. From the outside, they appeared to be building a conventional but comfortable suburban life. I visited a couple times a year, bringing gifts for the kids and trying to maintain a relationship despite the lingering undercurrents of our childhood dynamics. Madison and I were cordial, but not especially close. I remained the reliable brother who could be called upon in emergencies, like when I lent them $8,000 during Doug's brief unemployment after a company restructuring. The money was eventually repaid, but the thank you felt perfunctory, the help expected rather than appreciated. Family gatherings continued the familiar pattern. Madison remained the focus, her latest interest or the children's achievements dominating conversation, while questions about my career or life in Seattle were cursory at best. I'd long accepted this as our family's baseline and had built enough of my own life to find it more amusing than hurtful most days. My girlfriend, Sophia, a pediatric nurse I'd been dating for 2 years, noticed it immediately at her first Thanksgiving with my family. "It's like you're a supporting character in the Madison show," she whispered as we washed dishes while my parents fawned over Madison's description of a yoga retreat she'd attended. I just shrugged. 30 years and counting, I replied. Little did I know that particular Thanksgiving would set in motion events that would finally force a reckoning with this lifelong dynamic. It happened over pumpkin pie. Madison clinked her water glass dramatically, ensuring all attention centered on her and Doug. My first thought was a third pregnancy announcement, but her actual news left me genuinely speechless. "We've made a huge decision," Madison announced, practically vibrating with excitement. "We're selling the house and buying a converted van to travel the country for the next 2 years. We're calling it our Freedom Tour." The silence lasted 3 full seconds before my mother found her voice. "The whole country? What about the children's school? What about Doug's job?" Madison had clearly anticipated these questions. "We'll be homeschooling the kids. Actually, road schooling is what the van life community calls it. They'll learn geography by experiencing it. As for work, Doug can do consulting remotely, and I can teach yoga in different cities. Plus, we're starting a social media account to document everything. There are families making 6 figures just sharing their travels." I watched my parents' expressions shift from concern to their default position, supportive enthusiasm for whatever Madison wanted. My father asked about finances, but in the gentle way that suggested he didn't want to dampen her excitement. "The market is so hot right now," Madison explained. "Our realtor thinks we can get at least $450,000 for the house. The van and conversion will cost about $135,000 total, and we're getting the premium package with solar panels and all the luxury fixtures. That leaves plenty for traveling." When I asked about emergency funds, insurance, and the stability children need, Madison rolled her eyes. "There you go, with the negative thinking, Gary. This is why you're stuck in a corporate job while we're choosing freedom." After dinner, I found Doug alone in the garage, ostensibly looking for more folding chairs but clearly taking a breather from the excitement. When I asked if he was really on board with this plan, his hesitation told me everything. "Between us, I have some concerns," he admitted quietly. "But Madison is so set on this. She's been talking about feeling trapped, saying she missed her chance to travel before we had kids. I'm trying to be supportive." "What about your job?" I asked. "Marketing consulting isn't exactly a guaranteed income stream without established clients." He shrugged uncomfortably. "Madison thinks it'll work out. She says the first few clients are the hardest, then word of mouth takes over." I wanted to point out the magical thinking in this plan, but knew Doug was already aware. He wasn't convincing me. He was trying to convince himself. The details of their grand scheme unfolded over the following weeks. The house went on the market immediately after the holidays and sold within 5 days for $475,000, $25,000 above asking. Madison flooded her Instagram with progressively more elaborate plans for their Mercedes Sprinter van conversion, tagging every post with number "Freedom Family Journey." I made one serious attempt at a rational discussion over coffee when Madison came to Seattle to meet with the van conversion company. "Have you considered renting your house instead of selling?" I asked. "That way, you'd have something to come back to if van life isn't what you expect." Madison stirred her oat milk latte vigorously. "That's so typical of you, Gary, always needing a safety net. The whole point is committing fully to this new life. What about starting with a 3-month trial? Rent an RV before investing in a custom van conversion?" Her patronizing smile made my teeth clench. "You just don't understand freedom, Gary. You've always played it safe. This is about showing Emma and Lucas that life isn't about following rules and staying in one place just because society expects it. Kids generally need consistency and routine," I countered, thinking of what Sophia had told me about child development, especially during school years. That's such an outdated perspective. Children are naturally adaptable. They're excited about the adventure. Later that week, Doug called me. The hesitation in his voice was even more pronounced. "Madison keeps adding features to the van conversion," he said. "We're at $50,000 for the customization alone now." "That's a lot of money," I replied carefully. "I know, but she says it's still less than a house, and we need it to be comfortable for the kids." He paused. "She really needs this, Gary. She's been talking about feeling like she lost herself in motherhood. I'm hoping this journey helps her find whatever she's looking for." I recognized the rationalization of someone who'd already decided to go along with a questionable plan and was just looking for reassurance. "Just make sure you have emergency funds and backup plans," I advised. "Absolutely," Doug agreed quickly. "We're being really practical about the budget." As their departure date approached, I made one final attempt to discuss contingency planning. What if someone got sick? What if the van needed major repairs? What about health insurance across state lines? Madison dismissed every question. "We've thought of everything," she insisted, showing me a spreadsheet that I noticed lacked any category for unexpected expenses. "We have plenty of money. Stop worrying so much." The last time I saw them before their departure, Emma seemed subdued, asking me if I thought her best friend would still remember her when they came back. Lucas was more obviously distressed, clinging to his favorite stuffed dinosaur and asking if they could take their backyard swing set in the van. Madison cheerfully overrode their concerns, assuring them they'd make new friends everywhere they went. As I watched them pull away in their gleaming new van, custom-wrapped with their Freedom Family Journey logo and social media handles, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a slow-motion car crash begin. But I kept that thought to myself, simply waving and wishing them safe travels. For the first few weeks, their Instagram account updated regularly with carefully composed images from scenic locations. Madison in tree pose at sunset in the redwoods. The kids splashing in a crystal-clear stream somewhere in Northern California. Doug looking contemplative beside a campfire, laptop open as if conducting business in this idyllic setting. But I noticed small things others might miss. In one photo, Emma's smile didn't reach her eyes. In another, the van's interior looked chaotically cluttered despite Madison's pre-trip promises of minimalist living. The captions began including phrases like, "challenging but worth it," and embracing the unexpected hurdles of van life. By the third month, posts became less frequent, and the locations suggested slower progress than their ambitious route had planned. They should have reached the Grand Canyon by April, according to their original itinerary, but instead were still posting from small towns in northern Nevada. The first direct cry for help came via phone while I was at work. Madison's name on my screen immediately sent a wave of dread through me. "The van broke down," she said without preamble. "We need $3,800 for repairs. Something with the transmission. This mechanic is totally price gouging us because we're not locals." "Where are you?" I asked. "Outside Denver. We can't move the van, and the repair shop won't start work without payment up front." I wanted to ask about their emergency fund, but knew this wasn't the moment. "I can transfer the money, but I need you to pay it back when you can." "Of course," Madison said quickly. "We're just in a tight spot right now. The campgrounds have been more expensive than we budgeted, and we had to stay in hotels a few times because of weather." I sent the money, making her promise to text me the repair invoice. She did send something, though it looked suspiciously like it had been edited. No mention of this breakdown ever appeared on their social media, where they continued posting sun-drenched images of carefree family adventure. A week later, my mother called, her voice tight with poorly concealed worry. "Have you spoken to Madison recently?" she asked. "Just about the van repair," I replied. "Why?" Mom sighed. "She calls almost every day complaining about something. The van is too small, the kids are fighting constantly. Doug isn't helping enough with homeschooling. Your father and I sent them money twice already." "How much?" I asked. "Just $2,000. The first time, then another $1,500 last week. Nothing major." The casual way she mentioned lending my sister $3,500 spoke volumes about our family's financial dynamics. "I think you should call her, Gary. She might listen to your advice about budgeting." I almost laughed. "Mom, Madison has never listened to my advice about anything." "Well, you've always been so good with money," she replied, her tone shifting to something more manipulative. "It would be nice if you could be more supportive. They're really struggling." I bit back my initial response and promised to check in with Madison. When I tried calling, she didn't answer, sending a text that they were exploring a canyon with no reception and would call later. She never did. Instead, I received an unexpected glimpse into their reality when my college friend Ryan texted me from Utah. Just ran into your sister and her family at a campground near Moab. Didn't look like the number van life dream I've seen on Instagram. The kids were crying, and your sister and her husband were having a pretty intense argument near the bathrooms. That same week, Doug sent me a direct message that confirmed my suspicions. Hey Gary, this is confidential, but do you have any contacts in marketing departments who might need freelance help? Just exploring options, nothing urgent. The most telling insight came from Emma herself. Madison had given the kids her old tablet for educational apps, and Emma had somehow figured out how to video call me one evening. Uncle Gary, when can we come visit you? She asked, her voice small and tired. I miss having my own room and going to real school. Mom says we're learning so much, but we mostly just drive all day, and then she takes pictures of us pretending to read books. Before I could respond, the call abruptly ended. When I tried calling back, the tablet appeared to be turned off. Out of concern and, admittedly, curiosity, I began researching typical costs of van life. Most blogs and YouTube channels were surprisingly candid about the financial challenges. Fuel for a vehicle that size averages 15 miles per gallon. Campgrounds with hookups range from $30 to $70 per night. Routine maintenance is higher than for regular vehicles. And unexpected repairs can easily run into thousands. Based on conservative estimates, they would need at least $5,000 monthly just for basics, not counting any emergencies or luxuries. A quick calculation suggested they'd likely burned through half their money already, despite being only 3 months into their planned 2-year journey. That evening, discussing the situation with Sophia in our kitchen, I felt the familiar weight of family obligation pressing down. I'm worried about the kids, I admitted, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. Emma sounded so unhappy. Sophia's response was measured, but direct. You can be concerned about your niece and nephew without feeling responsible for fixing a situation your sister created. I know, but no buts. She interrupted gently. You've spent your life being the responsible counterbalance to Madison's impulsivity. At some point, she needs to face the consequences of her choices. I knew she was right, but 34 years of family conditioning is difficult to overcome. Little did I know that my resolve would face its greatest test only 3 months later. 6 months into their freedom journey, the facade crumbled completely. My phone rang at 6:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. Madison was crying so hard I could barely understand her. The engine completely failed, she sobbed. The mechanic says, $7,500. Minimum. We're stranded in Arizona. Middle of nowhere. 95 degrees. Kids are losing it. Once I pieced together the situation, it was even worse than I initially thought. They'd been driving through the desert when warning lights flashed on the dashboard. Ignoring them, a decision that made me wince, they continued until the engine made a terrible noise and stopped working altogether. A tow truck had taken them to the nearest town, where the only garage capable of working on their specialized vehicle delivered the bad news. We don't have that kind of money, Madison admitted between sobs. Our credit cards are maxed out. Mom and Dad already said they can't help anymore. That last part surprised me. Our parents had never refused Madison anything. Doug made things worse, she continued. He got into a huge fight with the mechanic, accusing him of inflating the estimate because we're from out of state. Now they're demanding payment up front before they'll even order parts. In the background, I could hear the children arguing loudly, and Doug's voice rising to shout at them to quiet down. How much money do you have left from the house sale? I asked, trying to understand the full picture. Madison's lengthy pause told me everything. We've had a lot of unexpected expenses, she finally said. Madison, how much is left? Maybe $40,000, she admitted reluctantly. But that includes what we need for the rest of the trip. Simple math made my stomach sink. You've spent over $300,000 in 6 months? The van conversion ended up costing more than expected. And hotels, we didn't realize how often we'd need them. Campgrounds were full, or it was too hot or too cold to sleep in the van comfortably. Then there was the incident in Texas, where we got broken into and had to replace our laptops and camera equipment. The list continued, each item representing another financial misstep. The Freedom Tour had become a money pit, draining their resources at an alarming rate. What struck me most was Madison's tone. She wasn't taking responsibility, but instead positioning herself and her family as victims of circumstance rather than the results of their own choices. Later that day, I received an unexpected call from Doug. His normally even voice was strained. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," he confessed. "Madison and I are fighting constantly. Emma is refusing to do any schoolwork and just cries about missing her friends. Lucas has started having nightmares and wet the bed 3 times this week." "Why did you agree to this plan if you had doubts?" I asked, trying to keep judgment out of my voice. His sigh carried the weight of months of frustration. "She was so unhappy, Gary, talking about feeling trapped, saying she missed out on experiencing life because we had kids young. I thought maybe if she got this out of her system." He trailed off. I never fully supported the plan, but I went along with it for her. Now we're stuck in this nightmare, and the kids are suffering. I was still processing these conversations when my parents called that evening, requesting an emergency family Zoom call. When I logged on, I found them sitting stiffly side by side on their couch, with Madison, Doug, and the children squeezed together in what looked like a motel room. My father cleared his throat. "We need to discuss how Gary can help with this situation. Not if I could help, but how I would help." The presumption left me momentarily speechless. My mother jumped in. "Madison and the family need a stable place to regroup until they can figure out their next steps." Madison looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "The kids need stability, Gary. They're really struggling with all this uncertainty." The irony of this statement, given that she had deliberately removed all stability from their lives, was apparently lost on everyone but me. My father continued, his tone laden with guilt-inducing subtext. "You've got that big 2-bedroom condo sitting half-empty while your family is struggling. Your home office could easily be converted to a children's bedroom." I finally found my voice. "For how long?" The question was met with uncomfortable glances between my parents and sister. "Just until they get back on their feet," my mother said vaguely. "And that would take how long?" I pressed. "What's the plan? Are Doug and Madison looking for jobs? Will the kids go back to regular school?" Madison bristled visibly. "We can't just plan everything out to the minute like you do, Gary. We need time to figure things out." "What about rent?" I asked. "My mortgage and HOA fees aren't cheap." The shocked expressions told me this question hadn't even occurred to them. They genuinely expected me to house 4 additional people indefinitely, at my expense, without any discussion of financial contribution or timeline. "We're family," my mother said, as if that answered all practical concerns. Emma's small voice broke through the tension. "Uncle Gary, can we please come stay with you? I'm so tired of moving around all the time." Looking at my niece's pleading face, I felt my resolve weaken. The children were innocent victims in this situation, but enabling Madison's irresponsibility wouldn't truly help anyone in the long run, not even Emma and Lucas. "Let me think about options," I said finally. "I'll call you tomorrow." After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the breathtaking entitlement of the request. The pattern of my entire life with Madison was crystallizing into this perfect moment of clarity. I was expected to sacrifice my comfort, privacy, and finances to rescue her from the consequences of her own choices again. The decision came to a head faster than I anticipated. The very next day, while I was in a meeting at work, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Madison. "Landing at SeaTac at 4:30. Parents bought us tickets. Can you pick us up?" I stared at the message in disbelief. They had purchased plane tickets and were flying to Seattle without waiting for my response about whether they could stay with me. The presumption was staggering. When I called my parents, my father answered with forced cheerfulness. "Good news. We found reasonably priced tickets to get them to Seattle today. The garage in Arizona is going to keep the van until they can figure out what to do with it." "Dad, I never agreed they could stay with me," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "We were supposed to discuss options today." "Well, they need somewhere to go, and you have the space," he replied, his tone suggesting I was being difficult for no reason. "Your mother and I would take them, but our place is too small since we downsized for retirement. I spent the rest of the workday distracted, texting Sophia about the situation. Her response was supportive but clear. "This is your home too, Gary. You're allowed to have boundaries." Despite my better judgment, I left work early to meet them at the airport. As I watched them approach through the terminal, Madison looking dramatically exhausted, Doug appearing beaten down, and the children dragging their feet, I felt a complex mix of emotions: concern for my niece and nephew, frustration with my sister's entitlement, and a growing resolve that had been 3 decades in the making. They'd brought 8 large suitcases plus carry-ons, clearly everything they'd managed to fit into the van. The sight of all that luggage confirmed my suspicion that they weren't planning a short stay. "Thank you so much for coming," Madison said, hugging me with unusual enthusiasm. "The kids are exhausted. We can't wait to get settled at your place." On the drive to my condo, Madison chattered about where they could put their things and how they could rearrange my second bedroom for the children. Doug remained silent in the back seat, staring out the window, while the kids finally slept beside him. When we arrived at my building, the doorman helped us with the luggage. As we crowded into the elevator, Madison turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is going to work out perfectly. Your building has a pool, right? The kids will love that." As I unlocked my door and they all piled in, dragging suitcases behind them, something crystallized inside me, a clarity I'd never fully embraced before. I watched as Madison immediately began assessing the space, pointing to my office and saying, "This will be perfect for the kids once we move your desk out." "Madison," I said quietly, "we need to talk before you start unpacking." She barely glanced at me, too busy opening doors and examining closets. "Can we talk later? We're all exhausted. I think we'll take the master bedroom since there are 2 of us, and you can use the couch for now until we figure something else out." The audacity hit me like a physical force. Not only were they moving in without my explicit agreement, but they now expected me to give up my bedroom as well. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the pattern that had defined our relationship since childhood. I was expected to sacrifice while Madison took. Any resistance on my part was labeled selfish. Any boundary deemed unreasonable. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I'd ever used with my family before. Madison turned, genuinely surprised. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. You cannot stay here indefinitely. No, I will not give up my bedroom. No, I will not rearrange my life and home to fix a situation you created." The shock on her face would have been comical under different circumstances. "But we don't have anywhere else to go," she protested, tears immediately springing to her eyes, her standard response when not getting her way. "The kids need stability." "The kids needed stability 6 months ago when you sold their home for a van adventure," I replied evenly. "They needed stability when they asked to stay in regular school with their friends. They needed parents who made decisions based on their needs rather than Instagram-worthy experiences." Madison gasped. "How dare you question our parenting? We wanted to give them experiences and freedom. What they're experiencing right now is homelessness because of your choices," I said, keeping my voice low so the children wouldn't hear from where they sat in the living room. "I'm willing to help, but not by enabling more poor decisions." Doug, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What are you saying exactly, Gary?" I appreciated his direct question. "You can stay for 2 weeks. During that time, I'll help you find an affordable apartment and connect you with job opportunities. I'll even cover the security deposit and first month's rent to get you started. But this condo isn't big enough for 6 people, and this situation isn't sustainable." 2 weeks? Madison's voice rose shrilly. "That's impossible. We need months to get back on our feet." "Why?" I challenged. "Doug has marketable skills. You're a certified yoga instructor. There's nothing stopping you both from finding jobs quickly except your own expectations." My mother's voice suddenly came from my phone. I'd forgotten she was still on FaceTime after helping coordinate the airport pickup. "Gary, that's completely unreasonable. They need family support right now." "I am supporting them," I replied calmly. "I'm offering temporary housing, help finding a permanent solution, and financial assistance for the transition. What I'm not offering is an indefinite, boundary-free arrangement that would make all of us miserable." "But family helps family," my father interjected from beside my mother. "Yes, they do," I agreed. But real help sometimes means saying hard truths and setting boundaries, not enabling harmful patterns. Madison and Doug made a series of choices that led to this situation. I'll help them move forward, but I won't sacrifice my own well-being indefinitely. Madison's expression had transformed from shock to fury. I knew you'd be like this. You've always been selfish, always judging me. You think you're so perfect with your fancy job and your fancy condo. This isn't about judgment, I said. This is about reality. My condo is 1,200 square feet. There's one bathroom. I work from home 3 days a week and need my office. Sophia stays here several nights a week. This simply isn't a viable solution for a family of 4. So you're choosing your girlfriend over your family, Madison accused, tears streaming down her face. I guess money and your fancy condo matter more than family. Before I could respond, Doug surprised me by placing a hand on Madison's shoulder. He's right, Madison. This isn't a realistic plan. We can't just show up and take over his home indefinitely. Madison whirled on him. So you're taking his side now? I'm not taking sides, Doug replied tiredly. I'm trying to be realistic, which is something we should have done months ago. My parents were still protesting through the phone, but I ended the call, promising to update them later. The children had retreated to the corner of the living room, looking scared and confused by the adults' argument. I crouched down to their level. Emma, Lucas, you are always welcome to visit me. I love you both very much. Right now, the grown-ups need to figure out the best plan to help your family get settled again. That might take some time and some big decisions. Emma looked at me with eyes too, knowing for an 8-year-old. Are we going to have a real house again? That's the goal, I assured her. But it might not happen right away. Things might be a little uncomfortable for a while, but we'll work it out. Madison grabbed her purse. Come on, kids. Uncle Gary doesn't want to help us. We'll figure something else out. That's not what I said, I corrected firmly. I offered specific, concrete help. You just don't like the boundaries attached to it. Whatever, Madison snapped. Mom and Dad will take us in. At least they understand what family means. With dramatic flair, she herded the children and Doug toward the door. I made no move to stop them, knowing this theatrical exit was another manipulation tactic. The offer stands, I called after them. 2 weeks here, while we find you a more permanent solution. Just let me know. The door slammed behind them, and I sank onto my couch, emotionally drained but oddly peaceful. For the first time in my life, I had stood firm against the familiar pattern. Whether Madison accepted my help on my terms or sought another solution, I had finally established that I would no longer be the default safety net without boundaries. For 3 weeks after the airport confrontation, the silence from my family was deafening. My parents' usual weekly check-in calls stopped. Madison's Instagram account went private. My messages to check on the children went unanswered. It was as if I'd been excommunicated for the sin of setting boundaries. Sophia was my rock during this time, reassuring me that I'd done the right thing, while acknowledging the guilt I couldn't fully shake. I keep thinking about the kids. I admitted one evening as we made dinner together. They didn't create this situation. No, they didn't, Sophia agreed, chopping vegetables with efficient precision. But you didn't either. And you offered real help, just not the unlimited bailout they wanted. Through mutual friends in Portland, I learned that Madison, Doug, and the children had indeed moved in with my parents. My mother and father, in their late 60s and enjoying their retirement in a modest 2-bedroom condo, had given up their bedroom to Madison and Doug, moving to a pull-out couch in their own living room. The children were sharing the small guest room, originally intended for occasional visits from grandchildren, not permanent housing. I tried calling my parents again, but the conversations were stiff and brief. My father mentioned offhandedly that things were a bit crowded, but insisted they were managing fine. The strain in his voice told a different story. Rather than wait for the situation to deteriorate further, I decided to take proactive steps. First, I researched affordable housing options in Portland. The rental market was tight, but I found several possibilities within a reasonable budget. Next, I reached out to my professional network, securing 3 potential job interviews for Doug through former colleagues now working in Portland marketing firms. Most importantly, I set up an education fund for Emma and Lucas, transferring $5,000 as an initial deposit. Whatever happened between the adults in this situation, I wanted to ensure the children's education wouldn't be sacrificed. I emailed all this information to my parents and Doug, deliberately excluding Madison for the moment. Doug responded almost immediately with a simple message: "Thank you. I'm looking into these options." 2 weeks later, my mother called. Her voice sounded exhausted in a way I'd never heard before. "Your father threw his back out trying to move the pull-out couch," she said without preamble. "The physical therapist says he shouldn't sleep on it anymore, but there's nowhere else." I waited, sensing there was more she wanted to say. "The situation here is challenging," she continued carefully. "The condo association has already sent 2 warnings about noise complaints. The children need more space than we can provide, and Madison and Doug are." She trailed off. "Fighting?" I supplied. "Let's just say they have different ideas about next steps." She paused again. "Your father and I may have been hasty in our expectations of you, Gary. The reality of housing 6 people in a space designed for 2 is more difficult than we anticipated." It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get. "Have Doug and Madison looked at any of the apartment options I sent?" "Doug has," she said. "Madison still thinks they're too small or in the wrong neighborhoods. She keeps talking about waiting for the van to be fixed so they can resume their journey, but Doug is adamant that's not happening." The following week brought a turning point. Doug called to tell me he had an interview with one of the companies I'd recommended. "It would mean committing to staying in Portland," he said. "Madison isn't thrilled about giving up on the van life dream, but reality has a way of asserting itself." I finished for him. He laughed, a short, tired sound. "Yeah, reality in the form of 2 kids who need school and stability, and in-laws who deserve their bedroom back." Throughout this time, I maintained contact with Emma and Lucas through video calls whenever my parents could facilitate them without Madison's knowledge. The children seemed caught between relief at being in one place again and anxiety about the tension surrounding them. "Mom and Dad fight after they think we're asleep," Emma confided during one call. "Dad wants to get a regular job and an apartment, but Mom says that's giving up on our dreams." "What do you want?" I asked her. Her answer was immediate and heartbreaking in its simplicity. "I want to go back to my old school and have my own room again." Lucas, now visibly more anxious than the happy-go-lucky 6-year-old I'd known before the van adventure, added, "I don't like sleeping in Grandma's office. It's too small, and I can hear everyone talking all night." Their words strengthened my resolve to help facilitate a stable solution, even if it meant temporarily becoming the family villain in Madison's narrative. A month after the airport incident, my father called with an unexpected update. "Doug got the job," he said, his relief palpable even through the phone. "They start him next Monday at the marketing firm you recommended. The salary is lower than what he made before, but it's solid, with benefits." "That's excellent news," I replied. "What about housing?" "They're looking at one of the apartment complexes you suggested. It's within their budget with Doug's new salary, especially if Madison starts teaching yoga again." He hesitated. Madison is still adjusting to the new plan. She had her heart set on continuing the journey once the van was fixed. "And the van?" I asked. "Being sold to cover the repair costs and help with apartment deposits," he said. It was Doug's condition for taking the job. No more van life for now. The shifting dynamics in Madison and Doug's relationship fascinated me. After years of Doug acquiescing to Madison's whims, financial reality had finally forced a rebalancing of power. It wasn't that Doug was dominating decisions now, but rather that practical considerations were finally taking precedence over Madison's fantasies. When I finally spoke directly with Madison 3 months after our confrontation, her resentment was still evident but tempered by exhaustion and grudging pragmatism. "I suppose I should thank you for finding Doug a job," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. "He earned the position himself," I replied. "I just made the introduction." She sighed heavily. "Everyone thinks I'm being unreasonable for wanting to continue our journey. They act like the whole thing was a failure just because we hit some obstacles." I chose my next words carefully. "It wasn't a failure, Madison. You had an adventure as a family. You saw parts of the country most people never experience. But adventures eventually end, and children need stability to thrive. So you still think I was wrong to try it in the first place," she said, the familiar defensive tone creeping back in. "I think the idea had merit, but the execution lacked planning," I replied honestly. "Selling your house rather than renting it, underestimating costs, not having adequate emergency funds, those were the issues, not the concept of travel itself." Something in my measured response seemed to reach her. For the first time in our adult lives, Madison appeared to actually consider my perspective rather than immediately rejecting it. "Maybe we could have planned better," she conceded reluctantly. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of responsibility, but from Madison, it was significant progress. As we ended the call, I felt the faintest stirring of hope that our relationship might eventually evolve into something more balanced than it had ever been before. 6 months after Madison and Doug abandoned their van life dream, I flew to Portland to see their new reality firsthand. They'd settled into a modest 3-bedroom apartment in a family-friendly complex with a playground and community pool. It wasn't the spacious suburban home they'd owned before, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, stable. Doug had thrived at his new marketing position, already receiving a small promotion. Madison had secured teaching slots at 3 different yoga studios, building a new client base. The children were back in public school, gradually re-establishing friendships and routines. My parents, clearly relieved to have their retirement home back to themselves, seemed to have gained a new appreciation for boundaries. My father even pulled me aside during my visit to say something I never expected to hear. "You were right to stand your ground, Gary. We asked too much of you without considering the practical realities." When Madison and I finally had our first honest conversation, without the filter of parents or spouses, we sat at a small coffee shop near her apartment. 6 months had given us both perspective. "I resented you for a long time after the Seattle incident," she admitted, stirring her tea. "It felt like abandonment when we needed you most." "I understand why it felt that way," I replied. "But from my perspective, I was offering sustainable help rather than a temporary band-aid." She nodded slowly. "Looking back, showing up at your place with all our luggage, expecting to move in indefinitely, it was presumptuous. I can see that now." "What changed your perspective?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Honestly, watching Mom and Dad struggle with us in their space, seeing the physical toll on Dad from sleeping on that awful couch, realizing that even people who love you unconditionally have limits." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Also, Doug finally stood up to me. He said he'd supported my dreams for years, but now it was time to prioritize what the kids needed." "How did that feel?" "Terrible at first, like a betrayal." She traced the rim of her mug with one finger, but also necessary. The van life fantasy was just that, a fantasy. The reality involved a lot of discomfort, fighting, and watching our savings disappear while the kids became more anxious every day. This level of self-awareness from Madison was unprecedented. I wondered how much of it came from genuine introspection versus the forced reckoning with reality that circumstances had demanded. "What about the kids? How are they adjusting?" Madison's expression softened. "So much better now. Emma's grades are improving again, and she's made several new friends. Lucas hasn't had a nightmare in weeks. They both still talk about the fun parts of our trip, but they're clearly happier with routine and their own beds." As our conversation continued, I realized we were having the first adult interaction of our lives, free from the childhood patterns that had always defined our relationship. Madison wasn't positioning herself as the victim or the star. I wasn't playing the responsible older brother cleaning up messes. We were just 2 adults, discussing life's complications with honesty. Over the following months, this new dynamic extended to the broader family as well. My parents began treating me with a respect I'd never fully received before. They sought my advice on financial matters rather than dismissing my caution as negativity. They acknowledged my boundaries rather than expecting me to drop everything for family demands. My relationship with Sophia deepened as well. My ability to finally establish healthy family boundaries removed a tension neither of us had fully acknowledged before. 6 months after Madison's family settled in Portland, I proposed, confident that our marriage wouldn't be subject to the dysfunctional family patterns I'd finally broken free from. Madison and Doug worked to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of shared reality rather than one-sided fantasies. Doug became more assertive about practical concerns, While Madison learned to channel her creative energy into more sustainable outlets, eventually starting a successful yoga program for children that combined her teaching skills with her genuine belief in freedom, self-expression. The children flourished in their return to stability. Emma joined the school science club and discovered a passion for experiments that would have been impossible during their nomadic period. Lucas overcame his anxiety through consistent routines and the security of knowing where he would sleep each night. When I visited Portland again for Thanksgiving, Emma pulled me aside to show me her science fair project. "I couldn't have done this in the van," she said matter-of-factly. "I need my desk and my books and time to think." "Do you miss traveling?" I asked. She considered this seriously. "Sometimes. I liked seeing the mountains and the ocean, but I like having friends more. And Mom says maybe we can take normal vacations sometimes, just not live in a van forever." Lucas, cuddling his dinosaur toy that had weathered the entire van life adventure, added his simple perspective. "I like knowing where my bed is every night." As the family gathered around my parents' dining table, a tight fit, but manageable for a holiday meal rather than permanent living, I observed the subtle but profound shifts in our dynamics. My mother asked Madison to help in the kitchen rather than treating her as a guest of honor. My father engaged me in a genuine conversation about my work rather than dismissing it as boring. Madison complimented Sophia sincerely instead of making the passive-aggressive remarks that had characterized her previous interactions with my partners. Later, as Madison and I stood on the balcony watching the sunset, she surprised me with an unexpected admission. "The freedom I thought I wanted wasn't really freedom," she said quietly. "True freedom includes responsibility to your children, your partner, your future self. I was chasing escape, not freedom." "That's remarkably insightful," I replied, genuinely impressed. She laughed. "Don't sound so shocked. I've had a lot of time to think while teaching downward dog to suburban moms." That night, driving back to our hotel, Sophia remarked on the transformation. "Your family feels completely different now, like everyone found their proper place." It took a crisis to get here, I reflected, but maybe that's what was needed to break patterns established over decades. The van adventure that had begun as an escape from responsibility had paradoxically forced Madison to embrace it more fully than ever before. The brother who had always been expected to sacrifice without question had finally established healthy boundaries, and parents who had enabled dysfunction for years had been forced to recognize the consequences of those patterns. None of us were perfect. Madison still occasionally drifted toward impractical ideas. I still sometimes felt the weight of family responsibility more heavily than necessary. Our parents still sometimes fell into old habits of expectation. But the foundation had fundamentally shifted towards something healthier and more sustainable. The real freedom, I realized, wasn't about escaping obligations or conventional living. It came from building a life based on authentic choices rather than reactions to others' expectations or escapist fantasies. It came from boundaries that protected without isolating, generosity that helped without enabling, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than entrenched patterns. As for my sister's van life dream, the converted Sprinter eventually sold for less than half what they'd invested in it. But the lessons it taught our entire family proved far more valuable than any financial loss. Sometimes the most expensive mistakes yield the most precious wisdom if we're brave enough to learn from them rather than repeating them. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who expected too much from you? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And if you know someone struggling with family boundaries, share this video with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these challenges is exactly the support we need. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that true freedom comes not from escaping responsibility, but from making conscious choices about the responsibilities we accept.